Good morning, my friends. Good morning, and welcome to another episode of PB Reads the Bible. Believe we're live. Yes, we are live. Woohoo! Wasn't sure about that, but yes, good. It's working. Coming from the home office today, had some stuff that I had to do this morning. So I'm coming from the home office today. Be coming from the home office again tomorrow, I believe. Wednesdays might be pre-recorded, so that there's something I wanted to do. But Thursday will be backlogged. Anyway, I'm Brian. I'm the pastor here at Christ United Methodist Church. Most of you know that because a lot of you have been following right along, which is awesome. It's another episode of PB Reads the Bible, as I mentioned, and today is episode 20 on our journey through the book of Romans. Romans isn't that long. I mean, it's a substantial book. It's 16 chapters, so it's a fairly long letter. But we've been taking our time going through it because Paul says a lot without saying a lot, we might say. He says a lot by only using a few words sometimes. So we're working on that. Anyway, I see we've got some folks here joining us this morning, and thanks for checking in. If you haven't already done so, go ahead and do that. Say something in the comment stream so I know you're there. Say hello to me, say hello to each other. Good morning, Maureen. Good to see you. Good morning, Pat. Hope that things are going well for Bill. Hope things are going well for Bill. I heard from a couple people that they will not be able to. We're gonna have to watch later in the day. They got some things going on this morning, so but say hello to them as well. One of those was Ron. He said to specifically mention that he's saying hello to everybody from, even though he's not watching live. So today we're going to take a look at the first part of chapter 10. Chapter 10 isn't a very long chapter. It's 21 verses, but I'm hoping that we're going to be able to get through the first 13 verses. I'm going to read the first 13 verses because I want to read them as one piece, and then go back and start breaking stuff up. But Paul really packs a lot in verse 4. N.T. Wright comments that it's a passage that is often misunderstood. So we're going to talk about that a lot. Of course, we're not going to talk about anything if I don't start. So I did say that our schedule for the week is today, tomorrow, Wednesday, and Thursday. Today, tomorrow, and Thursday will all be live at 9 o'clock. Wednesdays is possibly going to be pre-recorded, but it'll be live for you at 9 o'clock, so you really don't have to worry about anything. Next Sunday, we start our new worship series, and I'm pretty sure it's on Galatians. It's on Paul's book to the church in Galatia. So we'll be starting that next week. And yes, that's my last Sunday. I'm taking before my vacation. I'm taking a week off next week, and which means there's no Bible readings next week. We will pick up with chapter 12 of Romans the following Monday, which is the 23rd of August. Get through those last 5 chapters of Romans over that week and probably the following week, and then figure out where we're going after that, right? Man, time is flying. August is almost over. I saw a terrible meme this morning that said there's only four months left in the year. Actually, it's not even, right? Only 3.5. Anyway, so we're on chapter 10. I'm going to read verses 1 through 13 at all is one, because they are really, really connected. In fact, we miss some of the connection between the verses because most translations leave out a word that Paul uses repeatedly. In Greek, it's gar. In English, it would be for, which is definitely a connecting word, and Paul uses it numerous times in this passage. However, the NIV and the NRSV both fail to have it there. They have it there a couple times, but they don't have it there as often as Paul uses it. So we might miss some of the connection within these verses. And there's a couple of verses here that are often taken out, pulled out, and used as if they're not connected to anything else. So we're going to try to avoid that by reading it all in one piece. And I might even insert the word for. So if you're following along in NIV and NRSV and you notice you are home, are you feeling? Oh yes, Pat, I am feeling well. Sorry, you. I am feeling well. I'm. Thank you for asking. Thank you for asking. No, I'm home because of some family obligations, we might say. Sue had to go someplace, so I had to take care of the dog. But thank you for asking. You're so kind. And a similar situation tomorrow. Sue has some medical appointments today and tomorrow, and so I'm going to be broadcasting live from the home office. Dave Letterman used to use that line, the home office. I'll be doing that tomorrow. So what is it? Oh, that's like my shirt here. The staff is working from home today. So where was I? So if you're following along in the NIV and the NRSV and you hear me throw in the word for, please don't be too distracted saying, hey, it's not there. It's actually there in the Greek. It's just that they chose to not use it when they were translating it into English. But might be important. Brothers and sisters, my heart's desire and prayer to God for them is that they may be saved. I can testify that they have a zeal for God, but it is not enlightened. For being ignorant of the righteousness that comes from God and seeking to establish their own, they have not submitted to God's righteousness. For Christ is the end of the law, so that there may be righteousness for everyone who believes. For Moses writes concerning the righteousness that comes from the law that the person who does these things will live by them. But the righteousness that comes from faith says, do not say in your heart, who will ascend into heaven, that is, to bring Christ down, or who will descend into the abyss, that is, to bring Christ up from the dead. But what does it say? The word is near you, and on your lips, and in your heart. That is the word of faith that we proclaim. Because if you confess with your lips that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For one believes with the heart and so is justified, and one confesses with the mouth and so is saved. For the scripture says, no one who believes in him will be put to shame. For there is no distinction between Jew and Greek. The same Lord is Lord of all and is generous to all who call on him. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. Pause. See, if you were following along in a translation, you probably caught me saying for a couple times that weren't there in English. I'm not just throwing those around. They're there in Greek. For whatever reason, many translations into English don't put them in there. Don't put them in there. Maybe they thought Paul was being too repetitive. But I think that he was trying to make a point, and as far as connecting all this together, he's laying the groundwork, or not even laying the groundwork at this point. The groundwork has been laid. He's putting forth more evidence, more proof. And this is part of his dialogue, part of his debate with this idea of for. Everything's connected. And I know I've said that a lot as we've gone through. And we cannot forget things that Paul's written about before this point. And we also cannot forget that Paul is going to be writing more later on. So we can't forget this part and think that just this by itself. It's all connected. It's all connected. So we'll go back to the beginning here, and we'll talk about some of these verses. In chapter 9, Paul started off with this agonizing thing. Oh gosh, my heart is aching and breaking, and I wish that I could pray to be anathema and completely cut off from God for their sake. And he's talking about the Jews, his kinfolk by the flesh, his brothers and sisters by the flesh. So remembering that is important, and because this is who he's talking about in this passage. So when he says, my heart's desire and prayer to God for them, for the non-believing Jews, okay, for the non-Christ believing Jews, is that they may be saved. I can testify that they have a zeal for God, so he doesn't doubt he doesn't doubt that they have belief in God. He doesn't doubt that they want God. What he's saying is they're not accepting God's righteousness, which ties back into what have we learned about righteousness? Righteousness is the idea of vindication, and it's all based on God's faithfulness to the covenant. So when we hear this about being ignorant of the righteousness that comes from God, we might think that Paul's saying one thing, but hopefully we've learned a little bit about that word righteousness. It is the idea of vindication from God, and it's tied into the covenantal promises of God and God's faithfulness to the covenant. However, then he says, he uses that expression, righteousness of God, or righteousness, 3 times right in a row. And they mean 3 at least slightly different things. So that first one would be the idea of God's faithfulness to the covenant. The second one, though, is that the people, the Jewish people, in the way they kept Torah and the way that they relied on Torah, the way they staked their claim on Torah, was that they were trying to establish their own righteousness, their own vindication, and we might also say their own idea of covenant, saying that that they were trying to control the covenant, is basically what Paul is saying here. They were controlling the covenant, and saying that we're the chosen people, no one else is allowed in, unless you're fully Jewish, or through proselytization and become a Jewish convert, becoming a Jewish convert. But Gentiles, Greeks aren't permitted. But they have not submitted to God's righteousness. They have not submitted to God's righteousness, which would mean, so here, if we think of righteousness as this righteousness by faith, you don't submit to that. It's the idea of submitting to God's full understanding of covenant and God's plan for the covenant, which again, Paul laid out in chapter 8 by giving that recap of, I think it was chapter 8, no, chapter 9, he did that in chapter 9, did that recap of the life of Israel, the history of Israel, the story of Israel, which showed that Jesus, that the Messiah, the Son of God, Jesus, Lord of all, was the culmination of the covenant. The covenant. So the covenant is still in force. It's here. It's here. But his brothers and sisters, these Jews, failed to submit to this idea of covenant, still wanting to control it. Verse starts with 4. Yes. See, a couple of the verses do start with 4, and others do not. Oh, and you're right. The NIV does in verse 2, but the NRSV does not. Nice catch. Nice catch. We're going to see in other verses, like after today, when we get to tomorrow, every verse in Greek starts with the word 4. Everyone, okay. But nice catch on that, Pat. Thanks for bringing that up. Christ is the end of the law. Okay, so verse 4 is where a lot of trouble comes in, because it says, for Christ is the end of the law, so that there may be righteousness for everyone who believes. Pause. What does the word end mean? In the Greek word for end, which is telos, has the same understanding as English for the word end, which actually has two meanings. If I say we come to when we come to an end of something, it could be the completion of something, right? It could be just that something stops. The end of a TV show, the end of an episode of a TV show, the end of an episode. So in a few minutes, we're going to come to the end of today's episode. Doesn't mean we're done. It just means we finished today. Okay, but the end can mean done. The end can mean completion. However, we also use the word end to describe that we have reached the purpose. We have reached the point. We have reached our aim. We've got a goal in mind. Our end, the end that I have in mind, we could say, the end that I have in mind for doing this is to help you understand things, perhaps in a different way than you understood them before. That's the end that I have in mind. That's my aim for doing this. So when we use the word end, we can mean those two different things. We can mean something's completion, or we can mean something's purpose and goal. And specifically that we have attained that goal. Doesn't mean that something is over. It doesn't necessarily mean that something is over just because we have achieved our goal in something. That item, that program, that ministry, whatever it is, can continue. However, we have attained, it has reached its goal, but we've gone beyond it. We can continue. So in Greek, the word end can mean both things. Which does Paul mean when he uses the word in this phrase, in this verse? For Christ is the end of the law, so that there may be righteousness for everyone who believes. Is he saying that that Christ ended the law, like stopped it, got rid of it, so that it was no longer there and functioning, so that there may be righteousness for everyone who believes? Or is he saying that Christ is the aim of the law, the purpose of the law, the goal of the law, and has arrived so that there may be righteousness for everyone who believes? Those are two entirely different, just by changing the meaning of that word. Just by changing the meaning of that word, we vastly change the meaning of the whole verse. Now, you've probably often heard it preached and spoken about in the first point of view, from the first point of view, that Christ comes and ends the law. However, I would point out that Jesus himself in Matthew, in the Sermon on the Mount, said, I did not come to abolish the law, to bring the law to an end, but I've come to fulfill the law. So Jesus himself, we could see from that verse, from that passage, saying that he is the fulfillment of the law. He is the end of the law, not its abolishment, not its termination, but its goal, its aim, its fulfillment of the law. Doesn't he say that? He said, I didn't come to abolish the law. I came to fulfill it. I came to fulfill it. That understanding of the word end fits in very well. N.T. Wright points out, he lists several different passages where Paul uses the same word, not as the ending, the abolishing, the termination point of something, but as as something reaching its ultimate goal and purpose and termination. Okay, and he uses the analogy. He said, if you're driving in a car and your car breaks down someplace, that could be the end of your trip. However, you can also say if the car doesn't break down and actually gets you to the end of your journey, to the point, your aim, your goal, the point your destination, and doesn't break down, that also, is the end. It carried you to the end. It carried you to your destination. So we see those two understandings based on our readings so far. And I'm going to leave this to you, but Paul has spoken about the law, not from a bad point of view. Remember, he said, so what, is the law no good? Absolutely not. No way would I say that. And he goes on to say how good the law is. And what was the law's purpose? Is that it was to shine light on sin and gather sin all together. And so Jesus is the aim of the law. Christ is the end of the law from that point of view. Does that make sense? I think that makes more sense, reading it that way, and it connects very nicely with everything Paul has been saying so far. It also carries in very well. To what he's going to be saying next when we understand it that way. Not as an end, but as the aim, the goal kind of purpose. All right. Word is near you and on your lips. Okay, so next, for Christ is the end. And so, and verse 5 in both the NIV and the NRSV should start with the word for. Neither of them do. I don't know if any of the other translations, there might be one or two that do. It is there in Greek. For Moses writes concerning the righteousness. Why is that important? Because this is backing up what he's saying. Paul is using this as a demonstration. He's referring to other scriptures. He's referring to scripture. Paul would never consider himself to be scripture. He is referring to some scriptures and illuminating them in a particular way and connecting them to this. When I say he's illuminating some scriptures, he's not coming up with his own understandings. He is actually using the understanding, the first century, Second Temple understandings of some of these passages. We have to take our time going through them because we don't have quite the same understanding, and maybe because we're not as familiar with them as they were. Okay, so we have to we're going to go slow through these next few verses, which is why I'm hoping we're going to get through an explanation of verse 13, but we'll get there eventually anyway. For Moses writes concerning the righteousness that comes from the law, this vindication and covenant through the law, that the person who does these things will live by them. And that's from Leviticus. That's a quote from Leviticus. That is talking about the Torah law, and probably not all 613 laws, but the basic 10 commandments, which were given and numerous times in scripture are said, do these and you shall live. Do these and you shall live, kind of things. And Moses says, the person who does these things will live by them. But the righteousness that comes from faith says, do not say in your heart, who will ascend into heaven, that is, to bring Christ down, or who will descend into the abyss, that is, to bring Christ up from the dead. Saying what? That the law is far away, and that we would have to ascend or go down in order to reach the word, the understanding of God. But what does it say? And here he quotes a couple passages. Actually, he just did in those verses by adding that is to bring Christ down. He inserted those things himself into some scriptures from Deuteronomy, and that's what they were talking about as far as finding the word. that is to bring Christ up from the dead. But what does it say? It says, the word is near you, on your lips and in your heart. And then he inserts in parentheses, parenthetical statement, that is the word of faith that we proclaim. So the scriptures that Paul quotes, the first one I said is a quote from Leviticus. The others in rapid succession, rapid fire, come from Deuteronomy chapter 30, and that's important. And there are 3 verses right in a row. I think there are 3 verses right in a row that he quotes from chapter 30 of Deuteronomy. Now, why is that important? You're going to ask, Pastor Brian, why is that important? Why is that important? That's important because of what takes place in Deuteronomy chapters 28 and 29, and what chapter 30 is pointing to, and what their first century understanding of it was. Okay, in Deuteronomy, because a lot of times Paul is not setting up a dichotomy between Leviticus and Deuteronomy, saying that one is saying one thing and one is saying the other. He's not saying that. Not saying that one was saying that the law is good and the other one is saying the law is bad. That's not what he was saying. In Deuteronomy 28 and 20, Deuteronomy is mostly filled with, substantially filled, especially the last part of Deuteronomy is substantially filled with talking about the covenant and talking about the Torah, talking about obedience to God and to the Torah, and that through obedience to God and to the Torah, you have life and you have blessings. It's all about the blessings. It speaks of blessings over and over again. It also speaks about it then goes into, in chapters 28 and 29, into the curses for non-obedience of the blessings, ending with exile. God, giving up on you and casting you out from this land. Deuteronomy, when I talked about Exodus, I said this, and the same thing would be true for Deuteronomy. It wasn't written by Moses. It was written years and years, centuries later. And the form we have of it is probably post-exilic, or at least exilic, but most likely even post-exilic. So the idea of the exile being a curse from disobedience to the Torah law and to the covenant would be understood by them. So it would have been very easy for the author to put that into Deuteronomy 30, because by the time you wrote it out, it already happened. But it doesn't end there. These couple of verses come from the part where the author, speaking on behalf of God, is seeing beyond the exile to new blessings beyond the exile, to a reestablishment, as it were, of the covenant, and to the people having a turn in their lives towards God, so much so that, and Jeremiah talks about it, you no longer will anyone need to be taught the commandments, for they will be written on your heart. So that's from Jeremiah, but it's also from here Paul quotes it from Deuteronomy. The word is near you, on your lips and in your heart. It's not far away. You couldn't possibly climb up to get it, or you couldn't go down to bring it up, because it's already here. It is near you and it is in your heart. That's the promise from Deuteronomy, looking beyond the exile. That's Paul's understanding of those passages. He didn't come up with it on his own. That would have been the understanding of the first century second temple theology. And N.T. Wright points out that we see it in some of the Qumran texts and the Dead Sea Scrolls in particular. There's one Dead Sea Scroll he quotes with this very explicitly saying, well, what I just said. And what they seem to have understood was that there were the three stages, so to speak, of time. And the exile was the second, and the return from exile and this reestablishment of the covenant and having the law close to hand signifies the end time, the end time. It's coming at the end, right? Hopefully, I'm making this clear. Then Paul goes into to verse 9, and here we see very succinctly and very directly what he has at least hinted at, but now he becomes very clear with it. Oh, I should say that actually he starts in verse 8. In verse 8, he says, "This is the word of faith that we proclaim." He's talking about himself. He's very clearly talking about himself and his purpose for being an apostle, for being a preacher, for writing these letters, for being a missionary and going all over the place and telling the story. This is the word of faith that we proclaim, And he's going to get into exactly also why he does it. He does it for the Jews because he wants them to come to faith as well. If for no other reason than out of jealousy, because Paul's telling the message to Gentiles, and he's seen, and because they're seeing what happened. Because, but here it is, verse 9. He lays it down. Because if you confess with your lips that Jesus is Lord, and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. If you confess with your lips that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. That is the NRSV. Let's see how the NIV translates it. The pretty much the exact same. I believe in your mouth Jesus is Lord. If you confess Jesus is Lord, believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. Yes. So, but I think it's the next one. Yeah. Scripture says, "No one who believes in him will be put to shame, for there is no distinction between Jew and Greek." Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped verse 10. And that's the important one I want to look at. "For no one believes with the heart, for one believes with the heart and so is justified, and one confesses with the mouth and so is saved." Okay, and the NIV translates it almost at end. "For it's with your heart that you believe and are justified, and is with your mouth that you confess and are saved." The N.T. Wright points out that they take a little bit of liberties with the translation from the Greek when they say justified and saved, because justified isn't far from the point, as far as righteousness and vindication, but saved, the better English translation of the Greek word, according to N.T. Wright, would be salvation. And so reaches salvation. Okay. But Paul's laying down very, very explicitly and very succinctly his theology about the whole thing, and he has talked about it all along. But you have to believe with your heart that God raised him from the dead. Okay? Confess with your lips Jesus is Lord, and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead. You will be saved. For one believes with the heart and so is justified, and one confesses with the mouth and so is saved. The scripture says, "No one who believes in him will be put to shame, for there is no distinction between Jew and Greek. The same Lord is Lord of all, and is generous to all who call on him. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved." Pause. End of our reading for today. We'll pick up from 14 tomorrow. Paul does get a little bit repetitive there. He does that quite a bit. He mostly says the same thing several times over and over again about this believing and confessing. But it's important for him to say it. And what's the other big one that he throws in there in verse 12? No distinction between Jew and Greek. This one big family that he is saying that's what God's aim for Torah and for covenant was all about, to bring everyone into one family. Oh, well, friends, 9:35. Okie dokie. So we'll be, that's going to be it for today. We'll come back tomorrow with pick up right from there from verse 14. Oh, you know what I should have meant? And so thank you for joining me today. And I do pray this has been beneficial. I should have mentioned, because he said something in there that reminded me of my sermon from yesterday. If you tried to watch the video from yesterday's sermon, I'm sorry, Facebook pulled it, and I had to do some editing and put it back in. I used a clip from a movie from Jurassic Park, which we do have permission to show. However, our permission to show is only permission to show it live in-house in the sanctuary. We have permission we have a license to stream things, such as I'm doing right now, and to stream our worship services. But we cannot stream a video that has other people's copyrights on it. So, and I forgot that. I'm sure I knew that at some point, and probably should have had the video tech black it out or silence it when we got to that point online. But what I did was I cut the video, I took that piece out and spliced it back together, and I have now uploaded it to Facebook. So if you didn't get the chance to watch yesterday's video, if you tried and you were unable to do it, it's there now. Apologize again. I'm sorry that that was inconvenient for you if you tried to get it and couldn't, but it's there now if you wanted to go take a watch, take a look at it. It does wrap up our series. So if you've been watching the other ones, I encourage you to watch it just to find out how things end, so to speak. Anyway, my friends, pray you have a really good day today. I pray that you keep your eyes and ears, physical and spiritual, open to what God is doing in your lives. And when you see it, say, thanks, Papa, and tell somebody about it. I pray that happens today. Until we meet again, be blessed, my friends. Be blessed. Bye.